There is something wonderfully earthy about John O'Donohue's spirituality. He speaks about the soul, but he doesn't ask us to escape the world in order to find it. Instead, he asks us to pay attention to the world that we're already in, to the light coming through the window, to the sound of another person's voice, to the feel of a hand resting in ours, to the taste of bread, to the smell of rain, to the changing landscape outside our door. For O'Donohue, the sacred is not somewhere else. It's woven into this life, into our bodies, into this moment. And perhaps this is where I would like to begin with today, because John O'Donohue in the book dedicates one whole section to this, and it's about our senses. Because, of course, our senses, if you think about it, are our first spiritual teachers. Before we had theology, before we had a religious language, before we knew how to pray, before we knew that we knew that we were in the world and we experienced the world through our senses. We knew warmth, we knew hunger, we knew the comfort of being held. We knew the sound of a familiar voice. We knew the difference between darkness and light. And as we grow older, something rather extraordinary happens. We begin to understand that these ordinary experiences are actually not ordinary at all. John O'Donohue reminds us that they're gifts. Perhaps we become more aware of this as we age. Certainly, I think in my case, that has definitely been so. Because we begin to understand that nothing can be taken for granted. The body changes, our hearing might change, our eyesight might change, our mobility might change, and foods even sometimes begin to taste different. I don't know about you, but some things that I enjoyed for years, I can't enjoy anymore. This is all part of the process. And so we become conscious of the fragility of our bodies. And it's the body, of course, that we've inhabited throughout our lives. And yet, perhaps this too can be a spiritual practice. To notice, to savor, to say quietly, I am here. This morning, I can hear the birds. I can feel the warmth of the sun. I can taste this cup of coffee. I can see the face of someone I love. I am still here. And O'Donohue reminds us that the senses can become a doorway into what he calls presence. And presence is one of the great spiritual gifts. Because so much of our lives, if we're honest, are very often spent somewhere else. We're remembering yesterday. We're worrying about tomorrow. We're rehearsing conversations that we haven't had yet, but we're anticipating, or indeed conversations that may never happen. But O'Donohue reminds us that it's the senses that can bring us back here and now, the breath, this moment, this life. And maybe this is one of the deepest invitations of spiritual life, not to become someone other than ourselves, but to become more deeply present to the life that we have actually been given. O'Donoghue writes beautifully about growth. Again, another big chapter in his book. But I think that the understanding of growth is very different from the way that we often talk about it. Of course, we live in a culture that tells us we should always be improving ourselves. Am I right? Become better, become fitter, become more successful, become more productive, learn something new, set another goal, achieve another milestone. The list goes on. And there's nothing wrong with growth. And that's not what O'Donoghue is saying. In fact, indeed, the desire to grow is deeply human. But spiritual growth is not necessarily about becoming bigger, better, faster, or more impressive. Sometimes growth just means being and offering ourselves more spaciousness, more compassion, more patience, more ability to live with uncertainty, more able to forgive ourselves, more able to forgive one another, more willing, and this is a hard one, but more willing to admit that we don't have all the answers. And as we grow older, I believe that we discover some of the things that we once thought were essential are not essential at all. I'm sure some of you will agree with me. Things such as, and this I think is the benefit of growing older, right? The approval of others, the need to be right, the need to control what's happening in our lives or outside of our lives, the need to prove ourselves. And as we grow older, we begin to understand that there are some things that we can put down. And that too is growth. And there's a beautiful paradox here. Sometimes growing means acquiring, and sometimes growing means releasing. And sometimes we become ourselves or more ourselves by adding something to our lives. And sometimes we become more of ourselves by letting go. I think there's a wonderful metaphor if you think about trees. I think the trees know something about this. A tree grows by, of course, putting out new branches and leaves, and it also grows by shedding. Leaves fall, branches die back, and the tree does not regard this as a personal failure. It simply participates in the rhythm of life. Growth, change, loss, renewal, rest, growth again. And we humans tend to find this much harder, and this is something that O'Donoghue touches deeply in his book. We want often growth without loss, change without grief, aging without decline, life without death. But O'Donoghue invites us into something more poetic and I think more truthful. He invites us to see our lives as a journey rather than a project. And of course, a journey has seasons. This becomes especially meaningful when we think about aging. We don't often speak about aging poetically, I think. Very often we speak about it medically. We speak about retirement, health, mobility, memory, appointments. But I'm inspired by all that O'Donoghue wrote in his book because I came to realize that there is another way of thinking about getting older. And perhaps aging is not simply the process of becoming less. Perhaps it's also the process of becoming deeper. Life, if you like, is like a piece of music. And for those of you who are musicians or have studied music, will know that very often in the early movements, they're full of energy and possibility. And there are themes that we discover, people we meet, places we go, mistakes we make, dreams we pursue. And then gradually the music changes. The tempo may indeed slow. The pauses may become longer. Some of the themes from our youth may return, some may disappear. And some notes that once seemed insignificant suddenly become the ones that we remember the most. And maybe this is what aging can offer us, the opportunity to listen differently, to hear and listen to the music of our own lives, to notice the people that have shaped us, to remember and acknowledge the moments that have changed us, and to also acknowledge the love that we've received along the way, and of course the love that we've given, the mistakes that we've learned from, the things that we wish we'd done differently, and the things, of course, that we're grateful that we did. So perhaps the question of a later life is not how much more can I accomplish, but what has my life taught me? What have I become? What can I now give? And what can I let go of? And very importantly, what wisdom might I pass on? There's such beauty in those questions. It's not the beauty of youth, it's something quieter. It's the beauty of a life that has been lived. And so in his book, and again, there's a big chunk of it devoted to this topic, we come to the subject that perhaps is the hardest for us to hear: death. O'Donoghue does not treat death simply as the opposite of life. Instead, he reminds us that death is woven into life from the very beginning. Every moment passes. Every season ends. Every sunset disappears. Every child grows older. Every relationship changes. Every breath arrives and leaves. So, in a way, what we're doing throughout our lives is we're practicing that letting go. And so, of course, death remains the ultimate letting go. It is the threshold that none of us can cross in advance. We can prepare, we can wonder, we can fear, we can hope, but of course, we cannot know. And this is the challenge that O'Donoghue offers us, that this is where spiritual maturity becomes less about having answers and more about learning how to live with mystery. We don't need certainty in order to have reverence, he tells us. We don't need to know exactly what comes next in order to honor what is here now. And for those of us who are approaching this threshold, and for those of us who are living, it's the same. We're reminded simply to pay attention to what matters, to whom we love, to what is beautiful, to what remains unfinished, what can be forgiven, what can be said, and what, most importantly, I think, can still be received. And John O'Donoghue reminds us of something very important, that death isn't easy. Of course, it isn't easy to talk about, it isn't easy to think about, and often it isn't easy to go through. There can be a multitude of emotions. And yet there can also be tenderness and love and dignity and presence, and, to the theme of the book, companionship. And so perhaps what really is Anam Cara, soul friend. That's what it ultimately is. Someone who does not necessarily rescue us from the difficult places, but someone who's just willing to sit beside us. Someone who says, you don't have to go through this alone. I will walk beside you. I will listen. I will remember. I will hold your story. Oh, I find that so moving. I will hold your story. Because we matter, and our lives have mattered. And then to say, when I can't walk any further with you, I will carry your memory with me. What a gift we can offer one another. There's something deeply beautiful about the idea of companionship, because none of us knows the exact shape of another person's journey. We cannot, of course, live another person's life. And we can't take away another person's suffering, even though we want to, very often, desperately. And we can't walk one another through some of the phases in their life in a way that maybe they need or you want. But we can be present, and we can accompany each other. And perhaps accompaniment is one of the most sacred things that human beings can offer one another. Certainly, in revisiting this precious book while I've prepared for today, that's the thing that's really come through to me. Accompaniment is a sacred, sacred gift that we can offer ourselves as well as one another. Very often we think that spirituality is about transcending life, but O'Donoghue suggests quite the opposite. It's about becoming more deeply present to it, to the world, to our bodies, to one another, to sorrow, to change, to aging, and finally, to the mystery of death. Perhaps the spirituality of the senses and the spirituality of aging are not really separate subjects. Certainly the book leads you in that. They are, in fact, just one and the same in a way. They're about paying attention to the preciousness of being alive. Yes, our bodies change. And these eyes, my eyes, one day will close. And this voice one day will fall silent. And the people that we love will change. Some will leave us. Or maybe we will leave them first. The world itself will continue to change around us. But because this is temporary, and this is what O'Donoghue keeps underscoring, because it's temporary, it's precious. A flower is beautiful partly because it will not bloom forever. Here in the Western Cape of South Africa, there's an incredible phenomenon, and it happens only in September, and it happens only for 3 weeks. And acres and acres and acres of land that lie almost green and dormant. You wouldn't notice anything particular as you drove past them or walked through them. Suddenly, poof, burst into life, and it's almost like a Van Gogh painting or something. There's color and shape and vividness. It's extraordinary, but only for 3 weeks. So people rush to be there to watch it. And of course, often it's about the timing. Will we time it so that we're there at its peak? But I love that analogy, that it's just this reminder of how temporary beauty is. And of course, the sunset, I think, moves us because we know it's going to dip over the horizon and disappear. A child's laughter. I love the voice and the laughter of children. And I think it's because we know innately that childhood passes so quickly. And a hand in ours, for whatever reason, matters because neither hand will be there forever. Mortality doesn't necessarily mean that life is meaningless. Perhaps, as John O'Donoghue reminds us, it actually makes life sacred. So in closing, I'd like to ask a question for myself and for all of us today. What might we do with all of this? Or perhaps we could begin very simply. We could pay attention today, just to one thing. Perhaps the taste of our next drink, the breeze against our skin if we go outside, the sound of someone's voice that you're used to, but maybe just to pay an extra dimension of attention to their voice, the color of the sky, the face of someone we love. And we could allow ourselves to receive that moment without immediately asking it to become something else. Just appreciate it for appreciation's sake. No matter our age, all of us are growing older. And so we might have to ask another question. What wisdom is this season of my life right now asking me to discover? And an astounding question. And I think this is something that is worth journaling or thinking about. Who are my Anam Cara? Or who am I an Anam Cara to? Who are the people who've walked beside me? Who has helped me become myself? Whose life have I accompanied at whatever stage? And whose hand might I hold, metaphorically or literally, in a time of need? Because perhaps this is the poetry of being human. And as I said, John O'Donoghue is a poet, or was a poet. So poetry is this beautiful thread throughout his writing. We arrive, we open our senses to the world, we grow, we love, we lose, we change, we age, we let go. And throughout it all, if we're fortunate, we get the chance to walk with one another. Not knowing exactly where the path will lead, but knowing that none of us need to walk it alone or should walk it alone. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps in the end, a sacred life is not a life in which we escape, change, or overcome anything. It's a life in which we learn to meet each moment with an open heart and to savor what is here, to bless what has been, to welcome what is becoming. And when the time comes, to let it go with love. And so my final thoughts are these. May we be awake enough to notice the beauty around us. May we be courageous enough to continue growing. May we be wise enough to welcome the changes that come with age. May we be tender enough to accompany one another through loss. And may we be loving enough to walk one another home. May it be so, and so it is. Thank you.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.